Jim Lee has been basically the premier artist for DC for quite some time. It was a collaboration between Stan Lee and Jim Lee. The Lee brothers poster portfolio featuring artwork from Jim Lee, pencils by Jim Lee, inks by Scott Williams, and colors by Sinclair. I love some Jim Lee. You guys know that. That's right. We're going to talk about Jim Lee. Stay tuned. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to talk about Jim Lee, and technically we're not just going to talk about him, we're going to look at some books that, in my opinion, are core to any Jim Lee collection. If you are a fan of Jim Lee, in my opinion, these are the books that you have to have in your collection. And the very first book that we're going to look at is Samurai Santa. And this is a really awesome indie comic. Now, when you look at this does not strike you as a Jim Lee book. But I do believe that this is the first published work of Jim Lee. He actually did the interior pages as well as the interior inks. And I've had this book in my collection for a very, very long time. It is not in the best of shape, but that is not the point. It is an awesome piece of Jim Lee history, and it is just a really cool book to have in the collection. And again, this is just core. This is core to Jim Lee. And I will tell you, one of the cool things that I really like doing is collecting the first published work of certain artists that I really enjoy. And that's what makes that book really special in my mind. This next book is also a really cool book. I was able to find several copies of this book in the 100K collection. And this book is a special book because, again, it's some Jim Lee stuff. This is Alpha Flight issue number 53. Now, what makes this book awesome is that this is the first published cover that Jim did at Marvel. And another really cool book from this run is issue number 51. And in that book, I think he actually did the interior pages, but this again is the first cover that he actually did for Marvel, and it is a striking cover. It really is. Yellow covers are just awesome. So the next book that I'll show you is a DC book, and this one is maybe not my favorite cover, but I do really enjoy the story that is contained in this run of books. This is Batman issue number 609, and this is the first appearance of Thomas Elliot, who goes on to become Hush, or is identified as Hush. Great storyline. If you have not read it, I highly recommend you do. Again, the cover is not necessarily great, but that's okay. This next one is one that I love. I love the cover. I've never actually read the book, and I will do that tonight because as I was preparing for this video, I realized I had never read the book, but I love the cover, and I have a ton of copies of it in the 100K collection. This is Batman issue number 612, and this is, I believe, one of the first times that Batman and Superman actually fight. It is the debut, I do believe, of the kryptonite ring that Batman uses to level the playing field between he and Superman. And again, just not, this is not a good position to be in. It's just not at all, but it is a fantastic, fantastic cover that I absolutely love. And you'll notice here that not a whole lot of these books are slab. For whatever reason, I just don't have a ton of Jim Lee slab books, but I do have a healthy number of Jim Lee books. This next one is another, I think, important book in the history of Jim's career. This is Uncanny X-Men issue number 248. Now, what makes this book special is that this is the first time that Jim actually worked on the X-Men. And that's pretty cool. You saw the Alpha Flight. He did some things with Wolverine, but this is the first, I do believe, work that he actually did on the X-Men title. And you know, he went on to have a great career and a great run on the X-Men. This next book is in here just because I thought it was a cool book. I mean, it's not incredibly special, but I thought that it was a cool book. This is Wildstorm issue number 2, the variant. And as I say that, a lot of people probably don't quite know what I'm talking about, but also because I jacked up the title. This is Thundercats number 2 from Wildstorm, and you can see some Lion-O right there on the cover. This is a Jim Lee book. Doesn't exactly look like a Jim Lee book, but it is. It is. I'm not exactly crazy about this one, I'll be honest with you, but I do love some Thundercats, so that's part of the reason why I wanted to throw it in there, and it is a little obscure. I'm not sure that many people have seen that cover, so I thought it was a cool one to kind of throw in. And again, you know, if you're a Jim Lee fan, that might be some of the stuff that you actually have in your collection. This is a cover that I do believe was previously an interior page that is then a cover. I do believe that that's right. This is Wolverine issue number 1, the variant. And I think that this is like a 1 in 100 or something like that ratio variant. I picked this up from IG Comic Store a couple of years ago, and they always send out extremely minty books, and this one is no different, except for it has some bindery tears because the book is so thick. And again, the book can still get a 9.8 even with bindery tears. And for those that don't know, that's basically like a hanging Chad at the corners of the book, where because it is, I think it's called saddle stitched, the pages kind of tear on the very end of it. So nothing to be too concerned about, but it is one of those things that I wish Marvel would actually go with the square bound instead of a saddle stitch to prevent those bindery tears from occurring on the corners. So this is the last slab book that I'll show you. I actually have a couple of slabs here, but this is the last one, and this is Uncanny X-Men number 268. Now, what makes this book important? For one, it is an iconic Jim Lee cover. This is a classic cover featuring Black Widow, Captain America, and Wolverine. This book is also where it is revealed that these three have a history going back to World War II. And I think there's also the origin of the first time that Wolverine and Captain America actually met contained in this issue. Just a really cool cover, and that is iconic. It really is. To me, this also says 90s. I think this book was released in the 90s. This, to me, the triad, that says 90s all day. Jim Lee, Mark Bagley did a lot of that kind of stuff. More Mark Bagley than anybody. All right, so the next three books that I'll show you are just a couple of the slabs that I've pulled from the collection. And one thing that I will tell you is that I've attempted to identify books from my collection that I think are iconic. And Jim has done a lot of covers over the decades, so it was a little tough to narrow it down to what I've narrowed it down to because he has so many different covers. And I would say that I'm very interested in any cover that you think should be on the list that I am not going to show in this video. I'm always curious as to what people think. I have a feeling there are probably going to be some DC folks out there that are going to want a couple of more DC books, but that is okay. This next book is X-Men issue number 4, the first appearance of Omega Red. I picked up this CBCS version a couple of years ago, and just again, a really cool book, gorgeous red cover. Omega Red is a classic character, a classic modern character that a lot of folks are excited about. I actually have multiple copies of this. I actually have a CGC 9.8 that I sent in raw. It came back. I need a direct. I need a direct version at some, I'm sorry, a newsstand version at some point. So fingers crossed that I could score one of those. This next book, in my opinion, it's an iconic book. It is an iconic book. I grew up with the Wildcats, and I used to see this book in the LCSs all the time. I never had the money to actually pick it up, but as an adult, it puts you in a position to be able to do some cool things. This is Wildcats issue number 1, but it's the gold edition, and you probably cannot see that at all. It is shiny. It is incredibly shiny. Wonderful, wonderful Jim Lee cover right here. I loved the Wildcats back in the day. I actually went back and reread a lot of the early Wildcats a couple of years ago. It doesn't necessarily hold up, but it's still a classic part of my childhood. But there are some couple of really cool ones. There is the gold version for issue number 1. There is the silver version for issue number 2. I do believe there's also for issue number 2 a white cover that is a newsstand as well. Any of those, in my opinion, are really awesome books to have. I have a couple of copies of the golds, 1 copy of the silver, and 1 copy of the white issue number 2. I like some Wildcats. What can I say? At some point, I'd like to be able to get a 9.8 of this. It's a hard book to find at a good price in a 9.8, which is why I have 2 9.6s. And then the very last book that I'll show you technically is a multi-part. I'm not going to show you all parts of it, but it is an iconic cover. It is also an iconic book because it is the most or the best selling comic of all time, I do believe. 8.1 million copies of X-Men #1 were sold. And I only pulled one of the covers out. The one with Magneto doing the come hither hand right there. I absolutely love this run. I was, in the prime of my collecting back in the 90s when this came out. I picked up all the covers, a healthy percentage of the run. But what makes this particular one really special is that it is actually a newsstand. I have all of the #1s as newsstands, all in 9.8. The direct issue, heavily printed, newsstand, not so much. I actually pulled a ton of these out of a collection that I bought. It was a all newsstand collection that I watched for about 8 months back in California and was able to get the guy to a great place with the price, bought all of the books, and managed to hold on to a couple of 9.8s of this one. So there you have it. That is essentially what I think is a quintessential Jim Lee stack of books. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and as I mentioned, if you have some covers that you think should be here on this table that I did not mention, sound off in the comment section. Let me know why you think that that book or those books should be added. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.